We would like to welcome you to the Greater Iberia Chamber of Commerce Forum for candidates seeking the office of District Attorney for the 16th Judicial District, serving Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary parishes. I'm Andre Bro, Vice President of Policy Initiatives and Governmental Affairs for One Acadiana, and your moderator for tonight's forum. One Acadiana is the regional economic development organization for the 9-parish Acadiana region, and we are proud to support the Greater Iberia Chamber of Commerce Political Forum series. Tonight's forum is hosted by the Greater Iberia Chamber of Commerce, and we are grateful for the sponsorship of Iberia Comprehensive Community Health Center and the partnership with Leadership Iberia. Tonight's program is purely informational. Neither the Chamber, One Acadiana, Iberia Comprehensive Community Health Center, nor Leadership Iberia endorses any particular candidate running for office. There are a few announcements before we begin this evening's program. Our sponsors wish to remind you that the deadline to register to vote in person or by mail is October 5th. The deadline to register to vote through the Go Vote online registration system is October 13th. Early voting is October 16th through October 27th, excluding both of the Sundays. And Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. All of the Greater Iberia political forums will be posted to the Chamber's website at iberiachamber.org. Our candidates for this forum for the position of District Attorney are Bo Dewey and Lori Landry. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement. We will then ask a series of questions which each candidate will have 4 minutes to answer. Each candidate has also been given 2 rebuttal cards that the candidate can use to take 60 seconds to comment on something the other candidate said during their answer. Those candidates wishing to use a rebuttal card will hold up their card after the other candidate has completed his or her answer to that question, and when recognized will get 60 seconds to offer their additional thoughts. However, the candidates should be selective about when they use these cards because when their rebuttal card has been used, that's it. If the candidate wants to use his or her rebuttal card, they should just hold it up so we can see it. To assist the candidates in keeping time, there is a monitor next to the podium that will have the countdown of your time for each question. All of the questions I will ask tonight were predetermined. Questions were solicited from the public, and then an independent panel reviewed the questions submitted and came up with those that are to be asked tonight. All questions have been kept in strict confidence, and no one except a very small group of core panel members and I have seen them. Since there are 2 candidates in this race, we will rotate who answers questions first between the 2 of you. We drew earlier for the order of opening statements, and we will start with Ms. Landry and continue from there. Ms. Landry, please begin with your opening statement.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for Mr. Moderator. Thank you so much to the Chamber and Iberia Comprehensive for having us here today. I thank you, along with Bo, I am certain, for having this opportunity to speak to the community. I am Judge Lori Landry, retired and running for District Attorney. For the last 17 years, 7 months, and 20 days, you have trusted me as your District Court Judge in Division H. For the 8.5 years before that, you trusted me with the most precious of our citizens as I prosecuted sex offense crimes for the District Attorney's Office in the Parish of Iberia. I am here tonight as a candidate for the District Attorney. I am here because I think that there is a time for a change, and now is the time for us as a community to move past what we've done and which has not worked to serve our communities well, to make us safer, to build infrastructure, and to do a new thing. Our community is capable as neighbors of handling the tough decisions and the tough questions that move us forward. I am a native of Iberia Parish, born to Eva Fugile and Linus Landry Sr., Linus Landry Jr., who is deceased. The 2 of them had 7 kids. And at 28, my mother was widowed with 7 kids because my father was killed in a salt mine accident at Jefferson Island. She was fortunate enough to find another good, hardworking salt mine man, Leonard Lewis from Baldwin. They loved each other enough, and they had another child. So there was 8. He brought 3 from his prior relationship. So in his prior marriage. And so we were raised with 11 children. And so I know what it is to find my place. I know what it is to work on a team. And I also know what it is to lead. I am ready to lead the 16th JDC into a new era. I am Lori Landry, your judge, your choice for district attorney. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Landry. Mr. Dewey, you have 3 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I want to thank Iberia Chamber of Commerce, as well as Iberia Comprehensive and Association with Leadership Iberia, of which I am a graduate, for the opportunity to come here. Also want to thank Judge Landry for being present and giving the opportunity for our community to hear our different positions, and I look forward to this opportunity. I am Bo Dewey. I am your district attorney and have been so since 2015. A little bit background on me: I was born and raised in Iberia Parish in a community called Olivier between New Iberia and Jeanerette. I'm a graduate of Catholic High School of 1980. I graduated from University of Southwestern Louisiana at the time in 1984 with a business degree. I worked in the banking industry from 1984 to 1989. And in 1989, I made a decision to change career paths as a way to control my destiny in my life as to where I was going to live. I was born and raised on the Bayou Teche. I had Bayou Teche mud between my toes. And so I didn't want to leave this community. And I thought by going back to law school, at that time with the idea of coming back with a banking law degree, that would be the way to go. So I returned to law school at Tulane University in 1989, and in 1992 graduated. I was fortunate to come back and clerk for Judge Buddy Fleming. 11 months into that clerkship, District Attorney Bernie Boudreaux offered me a position as an assistant district attorney, and I took advantage of that, and from that point forward, I worked in the district attorney's office until today. I started out in misdemeanors, worked my way up through a felony docket. I did so with the great support of my wife, Lisa, my 3 children. I have a daughter-in-law now and 2 grandsons that I'm very proud of. My passion as district attorney came over the years, and it came over the years from being involved in seeing what was going on in our community and finding ways to help represent victims of crime, to help do what I could for those who needed opportunities in life to go forward without any obstacles. And by doing so, I became very, very committed to this community and to this job. I am proud of my team that I've associated and that I've been associated with for years. I'm very proud of the work that I have done, and I look forward to representing you over the next 6 years as your district attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey. We now have a series of questions that you will each be given 4 minutes to respond to. For the first question, we will start with you, Mr. Dewey. And the first question is, what are the 3 biggest challenges facing the district attorney of the 16th Judicial District, serving St. Martin, St. Mary, and Iberia parishes for the next 6 years? And how do these challenges shape your vision for the future of the DA's office?
Well, the biggest challenges are from various areas of what we do. Of course, one of our biggest challenges is the volume of work that is built up over the years in cases. That has been compounded by the pandemic and the restrictions as it relates to handling matters in the courtroom. And so I think we have to start thinking out of the box. We did during the pandemic use opportunities through teleconferencing to continue our obligations to keep the dockets moving forward. But when you start talking about jury trials and other events like that, it becomes more problematic. So I think we still have to start thinking outside of the box of the way to help move these dockets. And I'm really in favor of considering restructuring the judges and the organizations, that we can have maybe some dedicated criminal divisions like other districts where we could spend more time, because predominantly criminal cases are what happens in the court system day to day. So that is one of the biggest challenges that we have at this time. I think it's also important that we take advantage of other alternatives to going through the docket. We have a very robust pretrial diversion program that we use, for generally nonviolent first offenders, and it's kind of a front-end probationary period where we give people an opportunity to be accountable, opportunity to pay restitution if it's owed, community service, and it also gives them an opportunity to prove themselves, and if they successfully complete it, we don't charge them. And then they're not saddled with a conviction that could impede their future. It's a good way for everybody who has made poor choices. A lot of what we do in the DA's office is deal with good people who make poor choices. In addition to that, other things that are important is finances. As we know, the pandemic has caused some financial strain on my office, and that's because, unfortunately, we are basically funded by court costs and traffic tickets. And during a pandemic, obviously, those sources of revenue dropped dramatically, and I was forced to make some changes and some cuts in my office, like any other business person does in the community, and reduced expenses because we are a service industry for all practical purposes, and we cannot build more widgets to sell and increase funding. So that's one thing that has been a challenge for us, but thankfully our staff has buckled down and we've been able to survive through that process. One other thing that I think is important is to also, and a big challenge is to explain to the public about what we do as an office. Most people just look at us as we just prosecute criminals. And that is a small portion of what we do, although it's a primary portion of what we do. We represent public bodies across all three parishes, parish councils, school boards, airport authorities, hospital districts, and that's a function that we are statutorily mandated to do. We also run a misdemeanor probation department for the courts. We have the pretrial diversion program we talked about earlier. We are in conjunction with a contract with the state of Louisiana to child support enforcement, where we collect on average $22 million a year of child support, which is brought to the families that need it in support of their children, and that money goes through the community and helps support the community itself. We also have drug courts. We use drug courts as an alternative to going on the normal course and giving people who have addictions an opportunity to correct those addictions and move on successfully. So those are some of the challenges that I see.
Thank you. Ms. Landry, you have 4 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm going to start where Bo left off and go backwards. There are lots of things that are going to be imperative to the DA's office. Ever since I started running, I started talking about restructuring. So I'm glad Mr. Dewey and I are on the same page. But he talked about educating the public on what the DA's office does. They have always done this, and it's incumbent upon the DA's office to educate people before. This is what I know. The district attorney's office is responsible for making sure our community is safe in criminal prosecution. That is what they have chosen to build their reputation on. I was a part of the district attorney's office. I am a judge in this district, so I see what they do. If the community does not know, then that lies at their feet. In addition to that, I have been saying since I've been running, the district attorney's office plays a role in all of those systemic industries that impact families and children. You check the statistics with the families in need of services and those that come to the court because of FINs and child in need of care. The district attorneys receive a robust budget and grant from the state Department of Justice, the Juvenile Department, to do those things. So that doesn't come out of their budget. In addition to that, they play a role with public bodies. That is for the district attorney's office to tell that they play a role, and sometimes influence. One of the other things they talked about was streamlining. I agree. The judges in the district attorney's office have, for a long time, by statutory provision, have been connected to each other. The reason why the fines and costs are not coming in, because Louisiana is one of the very few states in the nation that funds the criminal justice systems on the backs of the people that utilize the system. Less traffic tickets, less people in jail, less fines, less money. However, this district attorney inherited a $4 million budget surplus when he took the office. I read that article. 117 employees. Streamlined, certainly. But when I've been in court, no one knows the The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. We both worked in the district attorney's office for the same amount of time and did more with less. Check their annual reports and how much money they pay in salaries and other things. That is public funds. If it doesn't go to the community, to victims for which they receive money, then it is maybe not mismanagement, but not best use. So I agree with him. We need to streamline. A lot of those employees that the newspaper talked about that they let go, I know for a fact that some of them have been rehired. The district attorney's office was not transparent and let us know that some of those people were rehired. The pandemic in 2 months, we all dealt with it. If those were decisions that needed to be made, then they needed to be made before that. And when he talked about volume of cases, this past jury week, by Tuesday, the district attorneys had no more cases to present for people in jail. That doesn't tell me that we don't have time to deal with the volume. We have time. We just need to work smarter and better. This is not anything that I lay necessarily at the hand of anybody individually, but it's Mr. Dewey's name that's on the door. And these things need to change, but they're not new. And Judge Landry, retired, running for DA, has been talking about that openly since I announced my candidacy. And I agree with Mr. Dewey. These things need to change. He has had an opportunity, the DAs before that. It's my turn to naturally make the changes. Thank you.
Thank you. For the second question, we'll start with you, Ms. Landry.
That'd be great.
And the second question is, what is your philosophy and plan regarding the office's relationship with local law enforcement?
Thank you for that question. My philosophy is the same that I've said for the 18 years I've been on the bench and the 8.5 years before that. Public trust brings us to a higher level. As a matter of fact, when Mr. Dewey's office complained about some things that I had said, they complained that they said, Judge Landry holds us to a higher standard. Absolutely do. Public trust holds us and elevates us to a higher standard. Police officers, like everybody else, I'm from a law enforcement family. My uncle, Colonel Terry Landry, retired, was the first African-American colonel of the Louisiana State Police. I was on the State Police Commission. I have people in my family that have served full-time military. I am law and order, except good law and good order. I think it goes down to leadership. They are supposed to be held to a higher standard because they accepted the public trust. I do hold myself to a higher standard than the person who's not sitting on the bench, the person who doesn't work for the public, the person who has not come to you and say, trust me with your families and your most important decisions. I absolutely hold myself to that standard, and I will hold law enforcement to that standard as well. You should know, Judge Landry was the judge on the bench that said, I don't believe some of these police officers. These things do not happen in a vacuum. They happen when you question the sufficiency of the evidence. And I was strong enough to say, nothing against you personal, sir, but this is not lining up with the evidence. I wasn't the only judge hearing that testimony. I wasn't the only judge that should have caught that, but I was the one that was listening. And courageous enough to say, this is incorrect. I was fought tooth and nail, because it was outside of what had been happening. Not anything anybody tells me, what I know. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is one thing. Probable cause is a threshold that's lower than anything else. And it's the responsibility of the DA's office to tell those who hire law enforcement officers, because we don't, I need credible witnesses. It is incumbent upon you to train them and send them here credible. Once upon a time, if you wore a uniform, when I grew up in New Iberia, or if you were a teacher, your word was gold. We know that is not true. People are human and they err. Sometimes it's a mistake. 2 times, I'm starting to look at you funny. 3 times, it's a pattern, and they do not happen in a vacuum. When I was a prosecutor, before I went to the bench, I brought law enforcement officers to the grand jury because sexual assaultive behavior had been alleged against them. It had not been done before, but there was a victim who said something that I believed, and we brought 2 of them to the grand jury. Now, that was bad leadership, led to bad policing. Most of the police officers I know are good, hardworking citizens wanting to keep my family and theirs safe. But lack of leadership leads to what we've had, not in California, not in Louisville, not in Minnesota, not in Baton Rouge, in New Iberia, and in St. Martinville, and in Franklin. And we can't act like that doesn't exist. And so I think good law enforcement wants someone to hold them accountable. And so that's why I think there is a very close relationship between the two.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey. Same question to you. You have 4 minutes.
Well, my philosophy on the relationship with law enforcement is, number one, is of course it's important to help assist in training law enforcement officers during the process. And, you know, as in every profession, you don't have 100% individuals who are good, solid people. I understand that. And during that tenure of the Sheriff's Department recently, we had an example of that. But when that was discovered, we immediately went out and notified all of the defendants, defense attorneys, about this, what we called a Brady issue, about there's some issues dealing with law enforcement, and we made them aware of it so they could take advantage of bringing those cases back, and we even encouraged them to bring cases back. We sent thousands of letters out dealing with that. That's what Judge Landry's talking about, is those kind of issues. And so we were very proactive in that. And we're very proactive from that point forward of any officer who has an issue dealing with their integrity or their credibility, and we understand our obligation to do that. So we're very, very forthright, and we're very, very aggressive in promoting that. Now, on the other hand, the vast majority, as Judge Landry said, are good police officers, and we need to respect that, and we need to understand and help and assist them in what they do day in and day out, which is risk their lives day in and day out to protect us in the public. And so therefore, I always aggressively and thoroughly help address those issues with law enforcement officers to support them. And I've been in the DA's office for 28 years. And yes, there's some bad apples that happen every now and then, but by and large, law enforcement is very good at what they do, and they're risking their lives day in and day out for that purpose. So my relationship, my philosophy is to, when there are problems in law enforcement, you identify them and address them. And where there are good things in law enforcement, you support it. And that's what we do. I do that day in and day out. These individuals are not very well paid, and they do this because they're committed to their job and they're committed to their communities. And that's extremely important. And we go everywhere from at the very start of cases, particularly homicides. We go out to the scene. We begin that relationship early on and making sure that the victims that are part of every crime are taken care of. Because in every crime, there is a victim. Whether it's a violent crime, a sex crime, whether it's a property crime, whether it's a drug crime. People who tell you that drug crimes have no victims are fooling themselves, because there's a lot of violence that goes on with that. There's a lot of addiction that goes on with that. And so we need to be there to support the victims, and it begins with those police officers in investigating the crimes, bringing them to our attention, and for us to make sure whatever case we put forward is the best case possible for victims of these crimes. And we will continue to do that. I'm very proud of my record and my staff's record for what they do in protecting the public and protecting victims. And that will always be our primary responsibility.
Thank you. And Ms. Landry has chosen to use a rebuttal. You have 60 seconds.
Mr. Dewey says that it's his intention and it's his philosophy. I ask you to look back at their record and how they handled those officers who were involved in 2017. Judge Landry spent hours in court reminding every person who came up of the name of those officers. The district attorney's office, through his first assistant, Mr. Vines, said that they sent them out to a private firm to be assessed. I haven't heard from that private firm about the assessment. The district attorney's office told me, because I asked, What are you doing? They sent it to the attorneys and they made it incumbent upon the defendant to look into the credibility and the validity of a conviction. Victims are not safe if people are in jail at the word of an officer whose credibility had been at issue for a while and nothing was done by the assistant. They did not happen in a vacuum. And I challenge you to check Mr. Dewey's records and his assistance on that issue.
Thank you. For the third question, we'll start with Mr. Dewey. What programs do you plan to implement, or what changes would you make to existing programs for drug addicts that are not accused of violent crimes?
Well, back in 1995, we recognize that addiction drives a lot of the crime. There's periods of times, while not all sheriff's departments have maintained them consistently, but there was testing for marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines, methamphetamines, and opiates when a person is arrested. And you were running in about low 70 percentile of those people being arrested are high on something upon arrest. So it doesn't take, a rocket scientist to figure out that drugs, alcohol drive a lot of the crimes. And we realize that, and I've seen with my own eyes, you had individuals who were otherwise very successful, may have gone in for some type of surgery, get prescribed an opioid. When that opioid was no longer available on a prescription, they resorted to taking illegal narcotics. And then they were looking to buy those narcotics and ran out of money. And then it turned into this cycle of committing crimes to support that habit. And so there you have a otherwise law-abiding, tax-paying citizen who has succumbed to an addiction. So we needed to do something about that. And the very first drug court that was created in the state of Louisiana was created in St. Mary Parish by Judge William Hunter. And that was a way to think outside the box as alternatives than the normal track of just putting somebody in jail or convicting them of a crime. That was extended out to all 3 parishes and exists today. And so that is something that is really, really important from my perspective of how to think outside the box in treating addiction. In addition to that, like I said earlier, we have diversion programs where there's some people who may have mental health issues. Mental health issues are a big problem nowadays in the criminal justice system because there's not appropriate facilities to treat mental health patients. And a lot of times, putting them in jail obviously is not the proper form to have them in because it just exacerbates the situation. Now, if a mental health patient is consistently committing some crime and we're not being able to seek the right attention, sometimes you're forced to put them in there to protect the public. But the best way to handle that is having the mental health facilities available to address the issue. And I think that's something that's incumbent that needs to be looked at by the legislature and statewide to increase funding for mental health facilities. Also, one thing that we do is we realize that in order to help change behavior, you often have to do it at a very, very early stage. That's why, and Judge Landry referred to it earlier in the grant funding, we have a family services division, which is full. It's staffed with former school teachers, social workers, mental health professionals, and what it does is we work in conjunction with the school system to turn and identify youth that are having problems. It's generally dealing with a home environment where you have a single parent and there's issues over there. So we assess them, we help change that behavior, we give them the services they need to turn around and them to be successful. In fact, on average since 2013, we've had 940 cases per year in that family services division that went through those programs, and only 1% ended up in the court system. And that shows you that 99% of it was successful in helping curb behavior.
Thank you. Ms. Landry, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. I think those programs that Mr. Dewey talked about are excellent programs. Janet Reno was the Attorney General at the time, and she pushed for drug courts, and we call them specialty treatment courts. I was one of the first assistant DAs behind Mr. Bud Lee to volunteer for that program, and Mr. Dewey at some point volunteered as well. However, it has become something different. It has become a place where we send people that may not have a drug problem for reasons other than getting attention for the drug problem. Also, the district attorney's office has the absolute authority as to who goes into drug court and who does not go into drug court, and they don't have to answer to anyone. That has, for the last 10 years, been a problem. Getting someone in drug court, even if they have a drug court problem. That's totally within the discretion of the district attorney's office. And we need to build that program back up to what it used to be. We need some other specialty courts, mental health courts, veterans courts. However, we have a ready-made system with Iberia Comprehensive and TESH Community Action Clinic. They have, and they are training those counselors on place. In the space, they come from all over to be trained right at TESH in Franklin. And we can utilize those people to do quick assessments of mental health problems. People who have mental health problems often wind up in jail. However, a high bond keeps them there when in fact they may not be a threat to the community. They usually are a threat to themselves and perhaps family members. The diversion program, absolutely wonderful. However, that diversion program is not free. And recently, it has become cost prohibitive to people. The DA's office sets the fines and the costs. It's not free to go through diversion. And while they can choose not to put somebody back on the docket, I found case after case where someone was in diversion, pretrial diversion. They had complied 85, 95% of the time, spent $2,500. And at the last minute, the DA was trying to put them back on the docket 5 or 6 years later. Because when a defendant goes in, they ask them to waive their constitutionally protected right of timing. This I know for myself. I brought it up 2018. They made some changes, but they weren't forthcoming about those things. And so those are good programs, but are not working the way they were designed. And they can be good programs. The family services, I was the juvenile court judge in addition to doing all of my other duties for 12 years in St. Martin. That can be a good program. I did not see, my experience for 12 years, did not see that only 1% of those people returned to the docket. They were supposed to divert them, but what happens is the school who we were working with would somehow find a way to get that child, who we know is a problem, on the criminal docket for something that happened at school. To be transparent, those things can work well. Some of them are working well. Some of the individual parts are working well, but they're not working well for the majority of the community. And they are not without cost to the participants. The probation department, the district attorney's office does that, but they receive a benefit for it. We started it because misdemeanor cases were not getting the attention in Department of Corrections. And so it was a good thing when we started, but I think we need to revisit all of those programs so that we can reassess where we need to go and the corrections we need to make to get it back on track. I challenge you to check those records for yourself. I'm not talking about what anybody told me.
Mr. Dewey has chosen to use a rebuttal. You have 60 seconds.
I first want to point out that when Judge Landry talks about our diversion program, of course, part of the diversion program is a cost associated to help us offset our cost in running that program. But what she fails to tell the public is we offer financial assistance in those programs. Everybody who comes in that program in my administration is notified of the ability to apply for financial assistance because they shouldn't have a difference between someone who can afford it and someone who cannot. And she fails to tell you that that is in fact available and has been taken advantage of. And we offer that for people. So to represent that there's a financial obstacle that we're not sensitive to is just simply not correct. On the second part of putting people back in the court system after they have failed to complete diversion, that's part of it. You're supposed to fulfill your obligations. If you're not, if we choose to do so, we can put them back on the docket.
Thank you. For the fourth question, we'll start with Ms. Landry.
Yes.
Ms. Landry, in light of the fact that a major source of funding for the DA's office operations are fees from misdemeanor traffic and criminal cases, and considering that as an unstable revenue stream, illustrated in part by the COVID-19 pandemic, how do you envision working through that financial challenge?
Thank you for that question. That's always been an unstable revenue source, and COVID-19 exposed it. Our legislature has not funded the criminal justice system, and that is something neither Mr. Dewey or I can fix. It has to be done at the legislative level. COVID-19 did not start this problem. One of the things I want to do is to take a look at the DA's office budget to see where we can be more fiscally responsible. Streamline some things that we know need to be streamlined, probably needed to be streamlined before COVID-19. Combine some things that we don't need 5 people to do, to have one person doing it. So first of all, to take a look at the current budget. All of us have to make our budgets public. And so the budgets are out there. I challenge you to look at them for yourselves and see how fiscally responsible this district attorney's office has been with public dollars. I think the legislature is going to have to make a decision. As long as the public defender's office, which 90% of the people that come through the criminal justice system are poor, uneducated, and without a lawyer, but they get a small amount of money. Mr. Dewey and any assistant DA has lots of assistants, and the balance is off. So what happens is you have young public defenders, unfunded, inexperienced, either can't, don't know, or don't want to do what's best to fight for the multiplicity of defendants that they have. So looking at the district attorney's office budget, it would be the first place we start. The inequity that's created by the state legislature and by Louisiana as an outlier in the country and the world, that's going to be, we have to answer that question from our legislatures. And that's a question you need to be asking of them. It is basically a conflict of interest for every judge to find someone when we get a percentage of the money for our budgets. The Supreme Court has said so. It doesn't just happen in Orleans, it happens here as well. So equality and justice require equality and justice in our laws and our policies. I challenge Mr. Dewey's answer on what the pretrial diversion has done as a whole. I know better. And yes, it's their right to return them to the docket, but not for a misdemeanor, not that you have spent 5 years on pretrial diversion. You have spent $2,500, and for absent maybe $500, you go back on the docket. When 1,000 of those dollars was an assessment fee or a fee that goes to the district attorney's office, not fines it. I challenge you to look at it. It's there. This I know for a fact. So there are lots of things that we can do. It's not personal. Mr. Dewey has had these 5 years to do it. It wasn't a problem that he created. He inherited it. He had these 5 years to do it. There will be no golden cows in a Lori Landry-led district attorney's office. We're going to restructure everything and keep the community safer because we're going to be smart on crime and keep low-level substance abusers out of jail, which the DA's office was not doing on a regular basis. Has been since justice reinvestment, but I call those cases convictions for low-hanging fruit. And they come back to our community and they draw on the system instead of save the money and reinvest it in safer streets, safer schools, and infrastructure.
Thank you. Mr. Dewey, you have 4 minutes. Same question.
Well, the revenue source for the district attorney's office is it fluctuates greatly because of the reliance on court costs, the reliance on traffic citations, and a reliable mechanism for funding is imperative to run a district attorney's office because any deficits are incumbent to be paid by the local parish governments. And as we know, parish governments have limited resources also. It just so happens that I'm sitting on a criminal justice funding committee for the District Attorneys Association, along with the other stakeholders in the state of Louisiana, to study that system. And we're in the process of doing that now and trying to figure out a way to have a more reliable source of income so you don't have to worry about these other unreliable sources. So that's important, is that we do that, okay? And also, I agree that you need to have a well-funded public defender system, because with a good public defender system, that helps the defendant. It helps us not have as many appealable issues that could happen down the road. And out of the traffic tickets, the public defender's office gets the lion's share of those revenues, and they have done so for years. In fact, their budget item from the state of Louisiana is almost double, if not more than double, with the district attorneys get in the state. We have very few funding except for the basic warrants, which is the base pay for the assistant district attorneys and myself. So funding in that regard is critical. So my ideas with this is to continue to adjust how we operate, be more efficient, which I've shown that when revenue has decreased, to take the steps necessary, like many businesses do in this community, while not sacrificing our obligation to the public to protect them. And I will continue to do that.
Thank you.
I'd like to rebuttal, if you don't mind.
You have 1 minute.
The public defender's office gets the lion's shares from misdemeanors. The DA doesn't get as much from misdemeanor traffic tickets because they don't need it. Check their funding source. They don't need it. The district attorney's office, however, participates in the LACE program, where they receive revenues from tickets written by state police officers who are working in conjunction with safe roads and safe highways, but those proceeds come to the district attorney's office. They don't need it. Check the DA's budget. They are responsible for being fiscally responsible. The public defender's office, first and foremost, is to be there to challenge the sufficiency of the evidence. We have an adversarial system on purpose. And when there's no one there to challenge, bad things happen, and convictions are not good convictions.
Thank you. For the 5th question, we'll start with Mr. Dewey. Mr. Dewey, a district attorney is held to a standard of seeking justice for all citizens, both defendants and victims. How do you envision your office balancing this search for justice? And please include your thoughts on the criminal justice reforms passed in recent years.
Well, I mean, obviously that's our paramount goal, is to seek justice. And that's what we do. It's not to get convictions, it's to seek justice. And so we train our assistant DAs, we train our law enforcement to make sure that is going on. Now, you mentioned the criminal justice reforms, and I just happened to sit on the committee for justice reinvestment. And there were many things that were appropriate in those circumstances that took our system and addressed them. For instance, a lot of the prisoners that are being held in local jails do not have access to training programs and educational programs that are necessary for their reentry into society. And I think that was a very good part of the criminal justice reinvestment. And as we can see from the Department of Corrections statistics, the numbers have decreased dramatically of those that are incarcerated. But the vast majority of who is incarcerated right now in Department of Corrections, approximately 65% of them are violent offenders and sex offenders. The misnomer of that it's only low-level drug offenders is simply not the case in Department of Corrections. So from my perspective, in criminal justice reform, it's always a good thing to do, is to look at what you're doing and how to change it and how to make it better. And we always were part of that process. District attorneys as a whole, before justice reinvestment happened, were a part of a panel or a group of laws that were put in effect that started the trend downward in the incarceration in the population itself. And so that is something that I've been a part of. I'm currently the president of the Louisiana District Attorneys Association. I will continue to be a part of, and we are committed to making sure we think outside the box while at the same time never forfeiting public safety, because ultimately public safety is the most important part of what we do. Protecting victims and making sure the public is safe and secure in their lives on a day-to-day basis. And we will always prioritize our obligation to protect the public.
Thank you. Ms. Landry, you have 4 minutes, same question.
I thank Mr. Dewey for his starts, but the question was, what's our opinion on equal justice for all? And Mr. Dewey didn't answer that question. Equal justice and access for all means everybody has access to a criminal justice system that's fair, notwithstanding your station in life or anything of that nature. Both Mr. Dewey and I sat on the Justice Reinvestment Task Force. And you can go and look at the sets of legislation that came in 2017. But I challenge you to look at the Pew Charitable Trust Foundation statistics and the positions that the district attorney's office took. They fought tooth and nail to keep those legislations that was shown statistically, not just in Louisiana, but Louisiana was leading the country in incarceration of its citizens. And the lion's share of those incarcerations were for non-violent offenders. I challenge you to go to Pew Charitable Trust Foundation and the district attorney's stated positions in 2017. We did work through a package of laws. Mr. Dewey and I were on that committee. They were compromises, but the district attorneys held on to that habitual offender law that we all know keeps people in jail for excess periods of time, which prevents them from challenging the sufficiency of the evidence on the case that's in front of them, just because they have another conviction. Defense attorneys sat on that same panel with Mr. Dewey and I and said, the first question I ask my client is not if you're innocent. Do you have another felony conviction? Because that's the hammer the district attorney's office does. They are looking towards solutions. I'm not on that committee, but we are behind everyone. We're behind Alabama, every other southern state, Louisiana. Go to the Department of Public Safety website and see the downtrend. The district attorney's office is claiming responsibility for participation in that downtrend now because it's saving money, but they fought it tooth and nail. I was there. Mr. Dewey was there. And I challenge anyone to say otherwise. We came to a compromise, but the district attorney's office is still responsible for who is to be determined as a violent offender. That's not a misnomer. One action can be billed as a simple battery. That same action could be billed as an aggravated battery. One's a misdemeanor nonviolent offense. The other one is a felony violent offense. That responsibility lies with the district attorney and his or her assistants. That's where the inequalities come in. That's where equal justice for all stops, and it's at the door. I can tell you the young assistants when we came up were trained. I could tell you the young assistants who are making these line decisions now know not about consistency. Because when I asked, the district attorney's office was not only offended, they challenged me. And I challenged them to say otherwise. Check the records for yourself. Equality and justice for all starts in the office. And it starts with a culture. And if you don't know what your biases are, you can't manage them. And if you say you don't have a bias, then you're not telling the truth, because it's science and we all have one. It starts with policies and starts from the top. They're lacking those things. Mr. Dewey has had 5 years and 23 before that to impact it.
Mr. Dewey has chosen to use a rebuttal. You have 60 seconds.
Very quickly, the Pew Charitable Trust expressed this large volume of nonviolent offenders. All of the district attorneys, 42 of us in the state, went and did a random sampling of the cases they were referring to. And what we found was, of those people that they claimed were nonviolent, First of all, they're nonviolent on the charge that they are in. They may have many violent cases before that, but they're classified as nonviolent on the front end. Number two is, on average, in the 16th Judicial District, on the cases I reviewed, which was a 25% random sampling, each of those nonviolent offenders had almost 4 prior counts of convictions before the one that they were in jail for. So that could be 3 prior burglaries on the 4th burglary, that they're back in this. So when you're talking about they're nonviolent, they're not this misnomer of that's a first offense. The habitual offender is down 74%, the intake from Department of Corrections, of which we were part of that legislation that led to that. And to say otherwise is disingenuous.
Thank you. We have one final question before closing comments, and this question will be directed first to Ms. Landry. Do you support the lawsuits some parishes have filed against the oil and natural gas industry?
Explain to me what those lawsuits are. Which lawsuits you refer to first?
The question as submitted was the district attorneys in some jurisdictions have filed lawsuits against oil and gas companies. Is that
Asserting. I'm not going to answer a question I don't know the facts to.
right?
That's hard for me to do.
So asserting damages by the oil and gas companies.
Well, I think that just generally, I can tell you that I don't come from oil and gas money. My people worked in oil and gas industry. Mr. Dewey's family has oil and gas and oil wells and those things of that nature. I would have to look at that lawsuit to see what it expects to do. If there's damage to the property, it can be criminal, depending on the intent of the persons who've done the drilling. Civil lawsuits have been filed asking that those companies clean up the property. And those are before us, depending on what the jurisdictional amount is, or if they remove it to federal court. And criminal cases may be filed, but that just depends. I would rather our district attorney's office utilize our time in an area that more greatly impacts the people that we see every day. There's a small percentage of people that gain benefit, revenue from oil and gas, although it damages all of us. But the district attorney's office, we have a lot of things that we can do. And they were doing that on behalf of maybe the parish governments. And I guess that's within their statutory right. But we have so many violent crimes going on in our community. We have so many things that we want to protect victims from. I think the district attorney's time would be better served by dealing with inequality, cases where law enforcement or policing one particular group differently. Cases are being bought on credibility issues for law enforcement. Victims don't rest at night if those convictions aren't solid convictions. I don't know how I can tell a victim that this will not come back if we know for a fact we had some credibility issues. Those are appealable issues. We need judges on appeals court to take the courage, have the courage to make that stand. Some of them do, some of them don't. I would rather the district attorney's office spend their time minimizing the number of people that we send to jail and start those specialty courts that we know. Utilize drug court the way it's supposed to be. Start a veterans court as our veterans come back with post-traumatic stress disorder and wind up in our courtroom. Start a mental health court because monies have been removed from that budgeting. That is something that I wish our district attorney's office would do. Start a mentoring program that truly would keep young people out of the criminal justice system. Start a program, maybe they served 946 families. I want to see the measurable outcomes. I don't just want to see how many people you serve. I want to see the measurable outcomes so we can know if that program is truly working or not. May be good intentioned, but it may not be having the same impact you want it to have. I do challenge you to go to the Pew Charitable Trust. We don't do good policing ourselves. Doctors don't police themselves well. Lawyers don't police themselves well. Law enforcement doesn't police themselves well. Teachers don't police themselves well. And I dare say, DAs don't police themselves well. I would rather an independent body go and do a study. Violent crime is for the crime you're charged with, not the crime, your criminal history. And if they'd been that violent, had we done our work, they wouldn't be before us. So one of these things is not like the other. I wish I could answer your question more fully if I knew what the details were more fully, but I know of a lot of things that we could do as district attorneys that would better serve the community at large to make it safer on the streets from crimes. And so I thank you for that question, and I'm sorry that I couldn't add more to that answer.
Thank you. Mr. Dewey, you have 4 minutes.
Well, I know the answer to the question as district attorney. And what you're talking about is the coastal restoration obligations of the district attorney as well as the Attorney General, Department of DEQ, and those bodies that have a right, if they choose to do so, to file suit against oil and gas companies who are not complying with their permits. I know that because I'm the district attorney and I've spent my time researching and understanding what my obligations are. And your question is, what is my position on that? My position at this point is I have not filed suit against any of the oil and gas companies. They're a big industry in our region. I've been able to stay informed about the situation as any attorney representing individuals needs to do, and I'm representing the public, and I've continued to be informed on it, but I have not filed suit. I think it's unnecessary to file suit. I think it's important to monitor the situation, and I continue to monitor it daily with assistance of other attorneys who do specialized work in that area. So at this point, I have not filed suit. I don't intend to file suit, but I do intend to monitor the situation and address whatever needs that come up during the process. But since we got off subject on her question, I would further talk about the aspect of what we do. What we do as district attorneys and what I do as a district attorney, I'm very, very proud of. I'm very proud of. We are always going to aggressively protect victims and the public and not apologize for it. I am proud of the staff that is associated with me. I'm proud of my assistant DAs who do a great job. And I will not apologize when necessary for violent offenders and sex offenders to be very, very aggressive about it. We will continue to do so. We're going to protect the public. We're going to protect the victims, period. Now, on the other hand, we're always going to be compassionate, and we're going to look at opportunities for the nonviolent offenders, first-time offenders, to do something different, to try to help them in the future, not be saddled with convictions if it's appropriate in the facts and circumstances. What Judge Landry is failing to tell you is in each case, each facts are different, the backgrounds are different, so when she talks about inequality, you can't just put a blanket label on that and say A and B are equal. Each has a unique background. And you have to judge those situations based on that unique background and a determination of what justice is in that situation. And we have done that, and we will continue to do that, and we will always, always, always protect the public, protect you, and protect victims.
Thank you. And I can tell y'all are both legally trained because you're both presenting your case very well. And now you have 2 minutes for closing comments, and we'll start with Mr. Dewey.
Thank you. Once again, I'd like to thank the Chamber. I'd like to thank Iberia Comprehensive and Leadership Iberia for the opportunity tonight to address you, the public. I've been committed to this office for 27 years. I've spent my entire legal career serving the public. When I first became an assistant DA, before I was sworn in, I was not quite sure what we did. And I didn't know whether we prosecuted, we put people in jail, what do we do? I was naive at that situation. So prior to me being sworn in by Mr. Boudreau, he told me, he said, you know, Bo, he said, if you're a lawyer who has a client and you're paid and it's legal and ethical, you do what your client wants you to do, even though it may be something you personally choose not to do. Mm-hmm. And what he told me, he said, when you raise your hand and I swear you in, all I'm ever going to ask you to do is the right thing. And that is the motto and that is the mantra that I have practiced my entire career, and I will continue to do so, is the right thing. That when aggressive prosecution of violent offenders and sex offenders are necessary, we make no apologies. We will continue to protect you, the public, and we will protect victims. When there are opportunities to do things other than convict somebody, whether it's through pretrial diversion, whether it's through some other alternative drug court, or something else that helps a person who has some problems, some addiction issues, some other problems, mental health problems we can help with, we're going to do that. And we're going to hold them accountable for the acts that they occurred while not penalizing them in the long term by having these convictions saddled to them. So I will continue to look at our situation. I will continue to look at alternatives on how to improve our system. I will stand by our finances that Judge Landry is challenging. Come look at them, and you will see that we are fiscally responsible, but we will always be here to protect you, the public. Thank you.
Certainly, I get 10 more seconds. Thank you so much for the Chamber and for you out there for taking the opportunity to listen to us. Don't stop now. Do your own research. Mr. Dewey says he spent his whole entire career and dedicated to the district attorney's office. I've spent my entire 58 years seeking equality and justice for women and for people of color. Mr. Dewey talks in generalities that if we're doing something, we're going to try to do better. I'm talking in specifics. Now is the time for our community to say enough is enough. Mr. Dewey has had his 6 years change. Before that, the 23 years he was there, Mr. Boudreaux told me the same thing. But what I realized when I left the DA's office and went to the bench, that everybody didn't see that statute or that didn't take that charge, one from Mr. Boudreaux, and everybody didn't take it, and it didn't mean the same thing to everybody. So I say, where your treasure is, so also is your heart. Check the finances for yourself. You know of circumstances. I know that there are good assistants out there doing good work, but I'm talking about the system and the culture that is disrespectful and is inconsistent in their application of filing bills of information and their application of who gets what order. The people that you talk about, the majority of good people making bad decisions, they don't look like me. Those 18-year-old kids get long sentences for making mistakes. And make no mistake about it, violent criminals and sex offenders who mean me and you in this community harm, with credible evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, will be in jail. And the victims will be able to sleep because that conviction will be good. We're not talking about those people, and don't let anybody else tell you differently. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Mr. Dewey's word for it. You know for yourself. Now is the time for us to move this community to a better place so that we could leave our children better than we found it.
Thank you. This concludes tonight's forum for the District Attorney of the 16th Judicial District. We certainly appreciate the time and effort put forth by both of our candidates this evening. And before we conclude, I do have a quick public service announcement I was asked to make, and that is that the deadline for the 2020 census is fast approaching. It's September 30th, and if you have not already done so, please take the time to complete the census form at my2020census.gov. Having everyone in Iberia Parish counted is essential as it determines federal funding for all kinds of important services, including public schools, roads, emergency equipment, and other things. Each person who goes uncounted costs Louisiana $2,291 in services. And as of yesterday, only 60% of Iberia Parish's population had responded. So if you have not responded to the census, please do so as soon as possible. On behalf of the Greater Iberia Chamber of Commerce, we'd like to once again recognize our forum partners, Iberia Comprehensive Community Health Center and Leadership Iberia. We wish all the candidates well, and we want to encourage all registered voters to exercise your right to vote in this upcoming election. This concludes this year's Political Forum series. Remember, you can watch the forums in their entirety at iberiachamber.org. We wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.